Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connie Barrera, and especially working at Jackson Health System, I've selected to evaluate the legal and ethical challenges related to IoT systems and specifically remote patient monitoring or blood pressure cuff devices. So, a quick overview. These devices basically are the same as you see in a hospital, but they're intended for using from home. And so the patient has a cuff that they put on their arm, and it basically reads over Bluetooth to a companion mobile app where it captures the data. The data collected is both systolic and diastolic blood pressure readings and heart rate. It also includes a timestamp and reading frequency, patient ID linked to the clinic's EHR, whether it's Cerner or Epic are two of the most popular systems, as well as the device metadata. The actual flow is basically that the patient takes a reading, it is synced through the mobile application, it's uploaded to the cloud platform, and then in turn the clinicians, physicians will access the patient information via a portal or dashboard that they have on their side. The legal framework of the application and where it complies, and here I am applying the HIPAA privacy and security rule. And so these devices comply with the HIPAA regulation because they will encrypt data in transit and at rest. Also, for example, when our hospital decides to use a particular technology, we make sure that we have in place what's called the business associate agreement. And so this would cover everything from the app to whatever the cloud vendor is that is hosting the data once it's being received. There's also role-based access controls limiting who on the clinical care team can access this patient information. And there is robust audit logging to support the HIPAA security requirements. Now, where these solutions typically fall short is that although these devices are cleared by the Food and Drug Administration, typically the companion apps allow the patient to sync pretty much with anywhere. And there could be other applications on the device that inadvertently gain access to the data. The data is therefore probably going to unintended places, and therefore this is where there's no guarantee that the data is protected under HIPAA's privacy and security rule. CMS also is worth noting that they require proof of transmission for billing. This is a really big deal. So the ethical dilemma, right? Who owns the data and the secondary use of home health readings that may not be intended consequences. And this happens because once the blood pressure readings leave the clinic and the HIPAA covered system, obviously, and leaves the live vendor's cloud environment, who controls the data? And this is where when we initiate a contract with a third-party vendor, there's a clause in there that we always include the stipulation that the vendor cannot use our data for any other purpose than what we needed. So that means they are not on their own even to de-identify the data, either for research and development, even to improve the system, and basically they shouldn't touch our data. We also include clauses that at the end of our contract, if we were to sever the contract, that they should sanitize our data based on DoD regulations, which means it's non-recoverable, and not keep our patient information. Now, this matters to the patient because with using the system, there's a huge benefit. It's not just blood pressure readings for single visits when they come to the hospital or attend the clinic, which could not be indicative of a true baseline. But this data could help insurance underwriters really do things or determine premiums in ways that is not intended by having the data tied to a patient. If they see that the patient's blood pressure is increasing, they might be more likely in the future to raise premiums. It also matters to society because if patients were to see this as a form of spying and surveillance rather than something that is there to help them, then they'll stop using it. So it really undermines a tool that could generally improve somebody's health. So some mitigation strategies that are really practical to reduce the legal and ethical risk involved. The first is not only to have end-to-end encryption like we do many times on credit card transmissions nowadays, finally, after all the credit card breaches, so that there's not a man-in-the-middle attack or other issues, but also to minimize what data is actually being transmitted. There could be a way to redact and have a different identifier in the portal tied to the patient, so the clinicians and the physicians know who the patient is without having that exact information transmitted. So simply to have the raw data of blood pressure, heart rate, and timestamp. That's it. Also, administrative policies, which would require signed BAAs with every downstream vendor in the data chain. And so that means that if the data were to go to a secondary clearinghouse, etc., that are not for the approved HIPAA-related use, obviously under HIPAA, you have the right to access the data if you're caring for the patient, if you're doing billing, things like that. But if it's for any other reason, there would be the requirement to have downstream BAAs. So that would be great and a really big mitigator. So the key takeaways here is for legal compliance and ethical responsibilities, they're not the same thing. And so with this type of device, it can be technically HIPAA compliant and still having some legal and ethical issues. And so making sure that when this type of technology is going to be deployed at an organization, that all these different facets are considered for the benefit of the organization, to be sure that its adoption is very successful, and to make sure the patient's information remains private and secure. Thank you all.